This weekend, Subtle Cow and I had our big tank talk, which lasted 4 hours. We went into detail on everything you need to know about playing Blood Death Knight and Pro Warrior in a top rank environment in Mists of Pandaria. I took the most juicy information out of that 4-hour talk and condensed it into my semi-guide of sorts while we wait for my actual complete Blood DK guide here on YouTube. If sitting through a 1-hour highlight of a podcast is not your cup of tea, most of the Blood DK guide on Wowhead is live, which is written by yours truly. I've linked to all of the guides in the description, and clicking on them and leaving a 5-star rating would mean the world to me. But with that out of the way, here's a deep dive. You enjoy. Yeah, so while I will say that they perhaps changed the least in the core aspect of like what it means to be a Blood DK, I still think that the changes that did happen are large enough to really have a huge impact and make them feel very quite different from how they felt in Cataclysm. So I don't know. I don't know if I've ever told any of you guys this before, but in Mists of Pandaria, Blood DK, Blood Death Knights get a 1-second GCD.
Wait, no way. This is the first I'm hearing of this. Can you provide some sources on that?
You'll just have to trust me on that one. Oh man, it feels so good. I've been playing so much MOP, and going back and doing the weekly Dragon Soul clear with the guild just feels terrible. It just feels so bad. Oh my god, it's insane. And I love the cat of Blood DK. But playing with the 1-second GCD on MOB just feels so different and it feels so good. Okay. The 1-second GCD out of the way. Glad we got that sorted. Obviously, a lot of things are taken off the GCD as well. So not only do you have a lower GCD, you also have a lot of abilities that are not on the GCD anymore, like Dancing Rune Weapon and Outbreak. No, not Outbreak. Dancing Rune Weapon and Bone Shield. Both the runic power cost from Dancing Rune Weapon is gone, but so is the Unholy Rune for Bone Shield. You obviously there's the Outbreak changes, right? Where it goes from a 30-second cooldown to a 1-minute cooldown. But that cooldown can be reduced completely by glyphing it so that it costs 30 runic power instead. You might not always want to run it, because if you put on Outbreak on target, using Blood Boil on a target will refresh your dots. And I want to say right now as well, because I know some people will make this mistake when they pick their talents, that it is not Roiling Blood that refreshes your talent or refreshes your diseases. It's a passive called, what's it called again? Scarlet Fever. Yeah, it's your Scarlet Fever debuff that actually, passive that keeps refreshing your buffs. It's not Roiling Blood. Roiling Blood only spreads the disease to different targets. Your pets are kind of insane. Army of the Dead on like Stone Guards is doing 5 million damage from one use.
Decent.
5 million from one spell? Are you okay, Blizzard?
Not to mention it gives you a damage reduction too while you're casting it, right? It still gives the parry dodge damage reduction.
Yeah, and since you're stacking parry, yeah, Raised Dead also do a lot of damage. It has its cooldown reduced. If you spec into a Death Pact, it doesn't actually kill the pet anymore. You get the heal, but you just take damage from the pet. The pet still lives. Scent of Blood is like a super core part of your gameplay now as well. Not only does it provide you with insane runic power when you're tanking at least one target, but it also gives you a healing increase with Death Strike. And if you're incorporating Death Siphons into your rotation, that means you have pretty much every single death strike you do, 100% bonus increase with that death strike. Obviously, Vengeance. Vengeance is quite different in Mists of Pandaria. I'm sure we'll touch a little bit more on that later, but it does definitely impact how you play a DK for sure. And it does mean that there are some interesting things that we have to think about with, in terms of how we snapshot diseases, different breakpoints for when we use certain spells, and thinking about when we use cooldowns and stuff like that, much more actively than we did in Kata, where we just had to make sure that, okay, we have a full Vengeance bar. That's going to happen from one swing. That's not the case in Mists of Pandaria anymore. Because if it did, that would be kind of broken. But
could you imagine just getting 500,000 plus attack power first swing?
Exactly. One swing. Yeah, that'd be nice. Obviously, there's a lot of other small changes, like you get runic power from using AMS again when you absorb damage. You have a way to reduce the cooldown of AMS with the glyph. You have different runic power regeneration talents. Your blood tap baseline is gone. And you have the option between a new version of blood tap, runic empowerment like you had in Kata, but then also runic corruption. It's just, of course, you have mass grip. Mass grip is insane. AoE grip.
So good. One of the best spells in the game, all time, for sure.
Undoubtedly. It's so nice. I think that's, kind of the overarching things that have changed and some of the new things, but I feel like you get to really feel how different it is when you actually start playing the game, and especially once you start getting good at it. You notice how fun of a spec it really is.
What kind of changes to stat priority are we going to be seeing? Are we still going for haste, Riyani, or what are we looking at here?
There could be a world, right? I don't see that being a world where we're in right now. I definitely think that we're going to be seeing much more focus on avoidance because of our new riposte spell, right? That converts our avoidance into crits, so we kind of get to double dip. We get some damage reduction, because you do get a lot of damage reduction from, as long as you take enough hits. I really don't like relying on avoidance as a damage reduction tool, because there is a chance that you just don't parry, right? And then your avoidance is so useless. But because we have so many things working for us with avoidance, Scent of Blood being a primary one, you get so much runic power, and if you get more runic power, you get more self-sustain, and you get more damage, of course. But then also converting 75% of that stat weight into pure crit is kind of insane. It's a really, really good double dip. It's not like you get 50% offensive value and 50% defensive value, but you get like so much value out of one stat. Kind of insane. So I suspect us to be going for hit cap, soft expertise cap.
Just soft cap, not hard cap?
Yeah, so I think hard cap expertise is kind of bait. I might have to eat my words when we get to Sims, but there are literally only 3 spells or 3 things that are affected by hard cap. Because Rune Strike can't dodge or parry. Death Strike can't parry. It can dodge, but it can't parry. And we have a lot of spells in our rotation which are affected by the soft cap, not the hard cap. So it's only melee attacks, hard strikes, which hard strikes, honestly, kind of whatever, and Soul Reaper. Soul Reaper is definitely big, but is it worth hard capping? That's 2,550 stats. I personally don't think so, but I might have to eat my words when the Sims come out.
Okay, interesting. And so from there, hit cap, expertise, soft cap. What are we looking for after that? Are we going for parry or?
Yeah, so I mean, it's gonna be similar to cattle, right? Where you have a spectrum. You know, you have a full offensive spectrum, you have a full defensive spectrum, and then you have somewhere in the middle. The somewhere in the middle for us in Kata was kind of going down the haste build, right? Where we valued the offensive value that we got from haste, and then getting some decent defensive utility as well from it. So that was kind of our balanced perspective. And this time around, our balanced perspective, I feel like at least, is going to be avoidance, going down with parry and dodge. Everything after that kind of becomes very, very whatever. Mastery, I feel like, is really whatever in this expansion. You get 3,000 mastery from your from Blessing of Might or your shamans or whatever. That pretty much puts you at what, like 80-85% without a single piece of mastery. Like that is more than enough. If you have some heavy physical fights with like heavy bleeds and you want a main tank, you know, you can maybe go higher, sure. And haste, it does hurt to say. I don't feel like it's gonna be necessary in this expansion. You GCD cap pretty much all the time, assuming you're tanking, assuming you're playing somewhat well, and I just don't think that it'll have that much value. So it's honestly a case of after parry and dodge, you could consider going hard expertise cap, but probably more likely going down valuing crit more, maybe even valuing both strength and stamina, for, you know, for the defensive value that it brings. Because in Mists of Pandaria, strength got a wild increase in the scaling to parry. So defensively, strength and parry has like a 1-to-1 coefficient. Like they are equal in value when you have kings on you. So I feel like when you go after the avoidance stats, you can kind of like go down whatever route and just have to like kind of figure out what it is that you want to do gearing.
Yeah. So just to mention on the strength parry thing too, that doesn't actually count toward your riposte. So that's one thing people should be aware of, is that you will get parry from strength and you'll get a lot of it, like Riyani mentioned, but you aren't actually getting crit from that parry. It has to be actual parry rating, not parry from strength, which is like a separate thing. So
exactly. So for example, if you have the wrist enchant and you have 180 strength versus 170 dodge, you might say, well, I'm gonna be a little bit more defensive, so I'm gonna pick up the dodge. No. That is not how it works. The dodge is actually the offensive option here when you compare the two. Assuming you have high enough vengeance for the 75% crits of that dodge to be worth more damage than the attack power that you get from strength.
Yeah, that's another thing is we kind of have to shift our focus just as tanks in general, going looking more at secondary stats than primary stats, because you're just getting a huge amount of attack power kind of baseline now from vengeance. So you'll have, 2, 3, even more 100,000 attack power just from vengeance. So any strength you're adding through, gems, enchants, whatever, it's just kind of a drop in the bucket at that point, because you already have so much attack power. So we just kind of have to reevaluate like how we're looking at primary stats. They just aren't as appealing as they were before. But I mean, they are still good to some extent, but basically the more vengeance you have, the higher value secondary stats are and the lower value primary stats are.
So we're looking into a prog scenario. I'll definitely say there's merit in having crit and not dodge parry and get a crit from riposte. And it's very situational. So I'll talk about that. Not prog. For prog, it'll just be dodge parry, in my opinion. Secondary stats are far more efficient and superior to primary stats as expansion, like you said, because we don't really gain anything from stamina other than having a little more HP, which we usually don't need thanks to all the DRs, externals, and purgatory. And then strength mainly just gives you the parry, and 2 attack power for 1 strength is very, very inefficient if you think at it from that standpoint. So for prog, it looks like dodge parry will definitely be the way to go, just so you can be like this invincible killing machine. Having gained the crit from those stats and having DRW up, by the way, another incredible source for parry, right? So you can use that as a defensive and not feel so bad about yourself, except for execute. That you definitely want a DRW for execute with Soul Reaper.
So there's a world where you go crit. I think that world for me is week 2.
Oh yeah, I
That's
mean,
pretty cool.
when people hear me talk and see how I play, they're instantly thinking I'm trying to grief everybody around me and just playing selfishly. But to be very honest, if you're at a high level guild, likely that farm world for you is gonna, be real very soon.
You might look at it and be like, huh, this is kind of similar to Kata. Look at this, like, look at the single target with priority. Okay, Death Strike. Yeah, Ruin Strike, Death Strike. We prioritize Heart Strike after Ruin Strike. This looks like more of the same. It's really not. It's really quite different. But if you just look at the spells that we're casting, quite similar. From a survival perspective, we always prioritize Death Strike. We really want to make sure we don't overcap on Runic Power, especially if you're running Runic Corruption or Blood Tap, which you should. Don't run Runic Empowerment. Don't do it. Anyway, then you still prioritize using Rune Strike over Death Strike, even if you have a Death 2 Death Runes available. You spam it so much. Oh my lord, you use so many Rune Strikes. It's kind of insane. Especially if you have AMS up at some point where you're taking heavy magical damage, you cannot spend your runic power quicker than you get it. It's kind of insane. And then you have your Crimson Scourge, and Crimson Scourge still gives you a Blood Boil proc, which is nice because we need to refresh our dots somehow. But it also gives you a Death and Decay proc. And I don't know if you looked at the damage breakdown of your logs or whatever, but 1 Death and Decay does a whole lot of more damage than 1 Blood Boil does. So you want to make sure to incorporate Death and Decay into your rotation again. So you kind of feel like an Unholy DK in this expansion.
Even for single target, right?
Mm-hmm. Even for single target. And especially for multi-target.
Yeah.
That's a lot of goddamn damage if you have a lot of targets down. Obviously, you get to incorporate your Soul Reaper into rotation as your highest priority after you get to 35%. You still ideally want to use your Blood Runes for those Soul Reapers. So after 35%, I pretty much never press Heart Strike. Pretty much. I of course, if I have control over the situation, and I know I'm not gonna put my my next Soul Reaper on a longer cooldown than it has to be because I don't have any Blood Runes, then I try to not really use that much below 35%. It becomes very much about playing around your vengeance to snapshot your diseases properly, and of course we probably get into this a little bit more later, but we have new developments in the Rune Forge situation. What we might be going down here, And so playing around with Cinder Glacier does add another layer of complexity, certainly with the snapshotting, and when you use your procs and when you don't use your procs. Death Siphon does not have a weapon modifier at all. And that means that if you have a rather low weapon, eye level weapon, and you have like even a little bit of vengeance, like we're talking like with the 363 or 463 weapon, if you have 10k vengeance, it is a DPS increase for you to use Death Siphon over Death Strike.
Jeez. Okay.
And the further down you go, into the vengeance, pool, the more of a DPS increase it is to use Death Siphon over Death Strike. The downside is you don't get a shield from pressing Death Strike. That is a big blow to active mitigation. However, the healing aspect of it is arguably stronger. Depends on how much damage you've been taking and whatever else. But most of the time, the healing will be stronger from Death Siphon. And if you have a modifier on the boss, we're talking Elegon, we're talking Windlord in Heart of Fear. you're just every time you press Death Siphon, it's a lay on hand. It's kind of insane. And we're talking a little bit about Cinder Glacier before as well, but that's another thing. Because Death Siphon is shadow damage or shadow frost damage. So every time you have a Cinder Glacier proc, your Death Siphon gets buffed by 20% as well. I have like on the Wowhead guide, I have a whole page that's basically just about breaking down the different points at when you would press this ability, and even provided a formula as well for you to plug in your weapon damage, and so you can always have it as a reference for whenever you progress into the expansion.
And for me, I've been prioritizing a lot of Blood Boil with procs over Heart Strike for sure, because Heart Strike can still parry, and I've been going for soft cap expertise. So that's the main source of getting parried for me is actually Heart Strike. It's just wasted damage. So I think it might be sometimes even more efficient use of just even blood boiling on just a regular blood rune without proc. It seems like, of course, when you get to the Soul Reaper execute range, you always want to keep one rune, probably, just to hang out there for when Soul Reaper is up again, as it's on a 6-second CD. But yeah, other than that, it's fairly similar.
Okay. What are your thoughts on that, Riyani? Using the Blood Boil over the Heart Strike with the Blood Rune.
I mean, like there will never be a point where on single targets, Blood Boil, where it will be a DPS increase from like the spell itself. But if you even have slightly higher vengeance when you use your Blood Boil compared to when you apply your diseases, then it's going to be a huge increase. So you always have to pay attention to your vengeance, but also your current slapshot on your diseases. And on the flip side, there is also a very real scenario where you have a good snapshot and you want to prioritize using Heart Strike even on multi-target encounters versus Blood Boil. Even though the initial hit of Blood Boil would be much higher damage, you're reducing your overall snapshot. Yeah, snapshotting diseases, doing Death Siphon shenanigans, tracking Cinder Glacier procs, this is so much less value than being able to properly track external raid cooldowns, moving out of shit on the ground, learning movement patterns for your raid, actually using your defensive cooldowns, and using your toolkit as active mitigation. So so you don't worry too much about I'm gonna re-snapshot my vengeance, right? My diseases right now. Oh shit, I'm dead because I didn't press Death Strike for the last, however many minutes.
Yeah, I kind of look at it like a pyramid. Like, you set the foundation, you learn all the basic stuff, you get the most gains from doing all that stuff, and as you go up the pyramid, you're making smaller gains as you go up, but there are things you can improve on once you're like ready to get to that level. But you set the foundation first, and you slowly build up to that. You don't just right out the gate try to be min-maxing Cinder Glacier procs, but you know you're messing up the actual like tank mechanics on the fight and stuff to do that and things like that. So start with the basics. As you get more comfortable with each like level of, you know, min-maxing, you can just keep going up. Definitely a very high skill ceiling, I would say, across the board in MOP. There's just so many little things you can do to gain damage, which becomes more and more important.
Our first tier is mostly around disease management. And you have two realistic options between Roiling Blood and Plague Leech. And Roiling Blood allows you to spread your diseases through using Blood Boil, which is, you know, a huge thing whenever you have even more than one target in the fight at any point where you have to spread your diseases. Enormous. However, it literally does nothing. Not a single thing on single target. It is absolutely a completely wasted talent on single target. And then you might conclude that you want to play Plague Leech. And I think Plague Leech is a fairly good talent, especially since it was buffed in Mists of Pandaria to go from to get 1 rune from consuming your diseases to getting 2 runes, which is kind of big. That's a whole death strike. Or 2 death siphons. And the problem is that when you use it, you consume your diseases, and then you have to reapply your diseases as well afterwards after you cast it. And so either you run with the glyph that reduces your cooldown or removes your cooldown on Outbreak, and you can just use it like pretty much every 25 seconds if you want to, or you only use it every minute when you have Outbreak available. And the problem is that even though you only have is it 1 second GCD? I think it is.
I've heard that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Even if you only have a 1 second GCD, Plague Leech takes 1 GCD. You know, using your ability is 1 or 2 GCDs, and then casting Outbreak is another GCD. So you have a minimum of 3 GCDs to press 1 ability, which is kind of, doesn't feel great. But it is still, you know, a good talent, I would say, especially on single target where you have literally no use for Roiling Blood. If you don't want to play with Plague Leech, you can actually play with Unholy Blight. And it would be a fairly okay thing to do, because you can press it pre-pull, run in and apply your diseases, and every time that the diseases refresh, they get a new snapshot. You're gonna have low values at the start, and you're gonna keep getting a higher and higher snapshot as they get reapplied. And the benefit of doing that is that you're probably not gonna Dancing Room Weapon right on pull, so then you can use Outbreak with your Dancing Room Weapon to get a double application. But yeah, Roiling Blood is what you're gonna have in like most cases, honestly, because there is no pure single target fight. There is no patchwork, you know. But there are fights where you definitely have a vast majority be single target, and then Plague Leech can be good.
Okay. So actually it sounds like a pretty interesting tier as far as you know, the new talents go. I feel like for a lot of classes, it's, you know, a lot of them are just kind of set and forget kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of cool that you actually have 3 potential choices here. Okay, so the next tier, obviously a pretty defensive tier. Big one here that just jumps off the page, obviously Purgatory, that cheat death that we talked about. But
Mm-hmm.
you also have the AMZ, which is
Mm-hmm.
the raid defensive. So are there any fights in your mind where you might take the AMZ over the Purgatory?
I don't think so in 25, man. Like, there is if you don't have an unholy DK at all. But for the most part, your tank wants to run Purgatory. And you're probably gonna have unholy DKs in your raid in the first tier. That being said, if you don't have another DK, you're gonna have to run it at some point. You're gonna have to run it on Stone Guards if you're doing the stack strat, for example. Right now with the bugged Elegon, you might want to run it there too. There's even a case to use it on what's it called, Fang as well, right? But I think primarily as a tank, you always want to run Purgatory, unless it's really really required for your raid. That would be more of a 10-man thing.
I think it's a safe choice. AMZ you're
mhm.
gonna see though, there might be strategies for some fights. It's like you said, maybe it's a comp thing where you only have one BDK, or you're the only Death Knight or one of 2. But there are strategies that are already coming up on some bosses where, say, you said Elegon, right? So let's say you never want to go out of the circle and you just want to build stacks until you phase the boss. One strategy is you're gonna send externals and you're gonna mix them up. And so if you don't have enough Death Knights for that, not saying that you shouldn't run Purgatory, but that could be a scenario where you're getting asked, "Hey, do you mind running that AMZ so we can have an extra, an extra set of ads where you just stay in and not die?"
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely. I gotta ask though, any use case for Lichborn at all?
You want to know the worst part?
What's that?
It's actually an okay
Oh yeah,
talent.
okay.
You know,
Because of Death Coil AP
that
healing scaling.
yeah,
Okay.
scales really well. Like, you will get actually like big heals from it, like 200k heals for sure. And if you're running Blood Tap, it gives you stacks for blood charges.
Okay.
Yeah, whereas it didn't give you Ring Empowerment procs in Kata. Still doesn't, of course, but if you're running Blood Tap, then it does give you stacks. That being said, even though it's big heals, right? I don't know if it's worth giving up the rune strike damage.
I think we'll leave that one to the PvPers. Let them have it.
Yeah, exactly. And then the biggest drawback is, of course, being on the same row as Purgatory.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Pretty awesome row there. So next one, this is kind of mobility slash reducing mobility of other things. You got Asphyxiate the stun, turns Strangulate into a stun. You got Chillblains to reduce movement speed, and Root, and then Death's Advance. This is pretty exciting because Buddy has always been a very immobile tank, so this is like a little sprint you get, and you also get this passive 10% move speed as well, just at all times. And I believe that stacks with the movement speed boot enchant too, right?
Not only does it stack,
so.
but they also boost one another.
They also boost one another?
You can free it, basically. You can free your boots enchant slot.
Well,
instead of having to go for movement.
No, they work with one another.
Yeah, they stack though, right?
Are you sure the passive works with the other passive?
Mm-hmm.
I haven't tested. Okay.
I believe when I looked at it, it at least changed my tooltip. I guess I haven't, like timed myself like running somewhere to make sure it's not just a tooltip bug, but I believe on the character sheet it does actually stack.
Yeah, and you get a total of 119% movement speed.
Pretty nice.
Instead of 118, the 8 plus 10. So.
Yeah. It actually, it shows
That's kind of
119.
insane.
You're right.
That is kind of insane, yeah.
Yeah.
And then what does it bring your movement speed up to? Because
119 or 140 with the active.
140 with the active, yeah. Oof. Yeah, that's pretty nice. And then also the effect that you can't be reduced below 70%. I don't know how useful that is in PvE. Excuse me. But yeah, in PvP, I remember this being kind of crazy too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so on this tier, basically always taking Death's Advance, or have you found some uses for the other two?
The Spirit Kings, Asphyxiate. Again, it depends on the comp, but even using you as a backup, it gives you an extra kick for no rune requirement on a 30-second CD. Strangulate actually becomes Asphyxiate, which is a very overpowered second kick. And a stun, of course, for the archer that debuffs you with sleight of hand.
Yeah, we noticed that a lot, that we had problems getting cooldowns that were low enough to be used on every single whatever plunder thing, whatever it's called.
Yeah.
And it has a 30-second cooldown for a 5-second stun.
You basically have it up for every single time you'll cast it, and then it also acts as a second kick for the other next two bosses after that. Yeah. So within one encounter, you have multiple uses for that over Death's Advance, which is not really advantageous to you because if you're in a tight spot, you're probably going to boots out anyway. And then AMS, of course, for full RP when you backfire.
Indeed.
Yeah. Death's Advance definitely nice on like Will of the Emperor. If you're ever, you'll have it up each dance pretty much. Yeah, 30-second cooldown. Each dance you'll have it. And so if for some reason you're like falling behind on getting to where you need to go, can throw that every time.
Yeah. Don't sleep on Chillblains for challenge modes either, though. It's quite a powerful kiting tool, especially when combined with Roiling Blood and Glyph of Pestilence.
Yeah, you can kind of just kite forever.
Well. Yeah.
So it's essentially like Piercing Howl, but you're also doing damage at the same time.
Piercing Howl where you do basically, 80% of your damage while still kiting.
Exactly, yeah.
I've seen that used as well. The Chillblains might be useful for actually like staggering the first closest mobs to you and then kiting around so you can gather everything up into a nice either Scorpion Grasp or just kiting them around in a circle. Gather all the mobs for everybody.
Nice.
Seen that in CMs as well.
Yeah, definitely seems like lots of good use. Okay, so the next tier, we got a lot of our healing stuff. We've been talking a lot about Death Siphon. Let's start with Death Pact just because it's the first one on the row. How are you feeling about Death Pact, Riyani?
Death Pact's great. I think this is what 95% of people should play on progression. Depending on their gear level, I will say. But yeah, Death Pact is great because its cooldown is synced up to your race set, which is great. And it also doesn't kill it anymore. And it's now 50% health. A 50% heal is kind of insane on a 2-minute cooldown. So it's really good, and of course, if you proc Purgatory, it's a really good tool to get yourself out of that as well. It does suffer from being on the same row as that Siphon for sure, but I think it's a really, really powerful talent, especially if you're not willing to min-max with that Siphon.
With the like raid AoE damage and stuff on fights, hitting pets, do you ever find that Death Pact does kill the pet, or that's pretty much never something that really happens realistically?
Something I've noticed, no.
Okay.
I haven't seen it kill any pets, but I think the biggest bonus for Death Pact if you're a beginner is that it doesn't cost any runic power anymore. It's free.
Yeah.
very good quality of life change if you're actually trying to get a heal from that.
All right, and Death Siphon. We've already talked about this quite a bit, but sounds pretty awesome. Tons of damage, tons of healing.
Yeah, exactly.
Should get you out of purgatory instantly, right? With
yeah,
Depending on your
I've seen
advantages
that
for sure,
before.
but-
Yeah.
And conversion. Is there any place for this, or the other two are so good that it doesn't really have much room?
Yeah, so the place for conversion is actually in the bin,
Okay.
the trash can.
I think instead of giving you something, it actually just takes from you is the thing.
It's a net healing loss, right? Because of the you can't get procs from Scent of Blood when it's active. So you get so much less runic power regeneration, and which means you're gonna have less runes to do death strikes and whatever.
Okay, fair enough. And this next tier, this one I feel like is probably going to give the most people issues, like when they first look at it, like trying to figure out what the best thing is here. So yeah, you want to go over this, Riyani? We got this Blood Tap, new version of Blood Tap first.
Exactly. So new version of Blood Tap. I wanna mention let's go over Blood Tap first. Yeah. So whenever you use Rune Strike or Death Coil, you get 2 charges of blood charges, and to get 1 rune back, fully depleted rune, you need 5 stacks. So that means that effectively every 2.5 runic power spender, you get one rune. Ideally, you want to you don't want to macro this into some ability and just have it as like a passive generation tool, but actively think about how you use it. In a progression setting, you ideally want to maximize your death strike usage. So that means that you want to store up at least 10 charges and use it at the same time. But you can also desync your runes, meaning that you put your blood rune on you turn your blood rune into a death rune, and then you have one normal death rune, so to speak, that's desynced from everything else, and then you only need another 5 charges to get a full death strike out of that. So it's kind of like you play around with your charges in order to funnel them into blood runes. And that's another thing to pay attention to as well, is that they always prioritize blood runes. So if you have 2 blood runes on cooldowns, they will always prioritize that blood rune. But yeah, this is the talent that will get you the most death strikes, and the most death strikes when you need it too. I think it's also gonna be a very interesting talent to use when you want to like only press Death Siphon, because it will work fantastic with that talent as well, and then you don't have to think about, desyncing your runes and stuff like that. It'll just use it like pretty much, all the time.
Okay, awesome. So you think this is, if you want to pay more attention to what's going on, you think this is like the top choice?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. And then Runic Empowerment. Anybody who played a Cat of Bloody Case should be well aware of this one. It's just the system we had before. You use your Runic Power Spenders, you have a 45% chance to refresh a depleted rune, or fully depleted rune. So it's just more of the same. Where do you see this fitting in?
I don't see it fitting in.
Okay.
The problem is that without the Kata rune tap or blood tap, blood tap,
I always mix those two up too.
Yeah,
It's gone
it
backwards.
becomes exactly it becomes kind of useless. Because in theory, like if you just look at the tooltips, Runic Empowerment actually gives you the highest theoretical rune regeneration. Because the other two talents will give you roughly 40% of a rune for every rune strike. Whereas Runic Empowerment gives you, in theory, a 45% or 45% of a rune every rune strike. However, the problem is, what the hell are you gonna do with that rune? You're just gonna have desynced runes for the entire time. Imagine you deplete your runes, all of your runes. You're like, okay, now I can press Rune Strike, which is another thing to talk about. You can't just press Rune Strike all the time. You have to have full depleted runes. So you're gonna overcap on running power a lot. Anyway, you get a proc from Rune Strike. You have one rune. Now what? Now you need to get another proc within, what is it, 7-something seconds, for you to even be able to use that rune. Otherwise, it's just wasted. You kind of bank on getting back-to-back procs, and if you don't, you're kind of not really getting any bang for your buck. So I don't think you should ever run Runic Empowerment in Mists of Pandaria.
Okay. So, I mean, that brings us to the only other choice we got left, then Runic Corruption. So this one is going to, it is somewhat similar effect, but it's actually going to increase your rune regen rate instead of just giving you a rune. So that will affect all your runes at once. So is this one you're looking at as a good replacement for Blood Tap then, if somebody didn't want to play Blood Tap?
For sure. This is like the set it and forget it. I think it has potential to give you like really high damage output as well. But one of the main advantages is that you don't have to worry about fully depleted runes. If you have, assuming you have like one rune on cooldown, you will, one death rune, or two death runes, on cooldown, then you can just spam Rune Strike to make sure that you don't overcap, and then you can use your runes again. And it keeps stacking on top of each other as well. This, if you get a proc of Rune Corruption and you press Rune Strike again after and get another proc, it just increases the duration. It doesn't like replace it. So it's really forgiving. It's a very, very forgiving talent. Whereas, Runic Empowerment, if you use Rune Strike, but you don't have all fully depleted runes, you don't get any value. You can also overcap on Blood Tap, on your blood runes, and be forced to use your death runes in order to proc or to be able to use your blood taps, but that's gonna overcap you on runic power and stuff like that. Runic Corruption is super, super forgiving. If you don't play perfectly, you will still get the full value pretty much all the time. So that is the main benefit of Runic Corruption, I feel like.
So we talked before about, mastering the basics before you kind of move on, progressing through min-maxing. Is this something you would recommend most people start with before they do Blood Tap?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Cow, have you played with all three of these, or a couple of them, or what have you found that you like the most here?
I'm agreeing with Riyani 100%. Runic Empowerment, it kind of loses its value because now they're making you choose either Blood Tap or Runic Empowerment, whereas before we used to have both on a basic level. Now Blood Tap, when I did play with it in Raid, it's like you said, subtle. It's just another thing to worry about. which you're not really trying to do if you go fast or you don't have the brain capacity and brain space to think about snapshotting and blood tap storage and all these things. I think if you're playing in a perfect sim, basically, is where you would take blood tap, or if you're at an expert level and have done the encounters hundreds of times, by that point you should be at a mastery level that you have the brain space, all the mechanics, you're automatically moving. But otherwise, I personally prefer Runic Corruption as a non-expert DK for sure.
Okay.
Even as an expert, I feel like if you're playing content that you haven't cleared over and over and over, I still think you should run it.
Okay, awesome. And our final tier here, this is, I mean, we talked about this a little bit. Anybody who's like played retail, anybody who's played retail knows about this one. That Gorfian's Grasp, that AoE Death Coil. And a lot of people misunderstand this spell too, so we should go over that too. You actually cast it on someone. So it's not just everything gets pulled into you. It can be if you wanted to, but you can cast on somebody 30 yards away from you, and it'll drag everything to them. So this thing is just insanely powerful. Like, it would be crazy enough if it only dragged things to you, but the fact that you get to choose like where it drags things, it's just so insane. What's been your guys' experience with this? I'm sure you're loving it.
It's the best thing ever, I think, for both CMs and definitely for Raid. It's actually funny because if you have multiple DKs and great minds think alike, you might actually sync up with another DK and waste it. Because everybody wants to know the best results.
Definitely.
Just give me all the mobs in one spot and give it where I want it. So placing a totem somewhere. When I say totem, it could be a pet, anything, right? A placeholder on a floor that you want all the mobs to go to, and there they are. It's crazy.
Yeah, in particular, like Will of the Emperor. I'm sure you guys are probably playing around with the strat too. Yeah, gripping everything together, rooting it together, all that stuff. So
yeah, that's where DKs become a big part of the comp.
But let's start out with the one glyph I think everyone should have, and that is Glyph of Regen Magic. Basically, it gives you cooldown reduction on your AMS based on how much absorb there is left when it's fully expired. And it's up to 50% cooldown reduction.
Pretty insane.
Is kind of nutty because
that's crazy.
Yeah, because you have a lot of fights where you literally just use AMS for runic power. For example, on Will of the Emperor, they have this passive ticking damage, right? You decreasing the damage with AMS from that, so inconsequential, but you still use it all the time because you get runic power from it. So it's just a constant stream of runic power. And then you are done with your duration, and your AMS basically gets reset to 50% with cooldown reduction right away, because it doesn't absorb the whole thing, right? Fantastic. Another glyph that I think is really good is a glyph of Festering Blood, which gives your Blood Boil the damage amp from having diseases, even if they don't have diseases, which is 50%. 50% damage increase is kind of a lot. And you might think, well, I'm gonna have diseases to all targets all the time. And that's true. However, when you spread your diseases with Blood Boil, the first application of that Blood Boil does not have diseases on them. So you just boost that Blood Boil by 50%, which is kind of huge, especially if you have a constant stream of new applications all the time. And then the other two is, the first one is Glyph of Pestilence, same as in Kata, just increasing your range by 5% or 5 yards. Which is only really good if there's like certain applications, right? The main places where I noticed it is Elegon, when you're spreading your diseases to the stars, when they spawn in the intermission, but then also on Empress in Heart of Fear. In the intermission, if you have the off tank somewhat close to where you are, with your two big mobs, then you can spread your diseases a lot easier if you have the glyph on as well. And then the last one I think that's realistically worth considering is Glyph of Outbreak. This is one we were talking about earlier, where you remove the cooldown of Outbreak, but it costs 30 running power. It's realistically, it's not insane because you kind of theoretically just need to apply it once. However, there will be cases where you're like, oh shit, my debuffs fell off. I'm stupid. There will be cases where you go out and fight mobs away from where your current disease target is, and then you will have to Icy Touch and Plague Strike. Ugh, God.
Could you imagine?
Yeah.
You have
shit
the
off the
stain
bars.
from it. It's funny because I've actually had to do it, and I think even on opener with very little vengeance is something I've been doing in order to not run that glyph. I will not be pressing Outbreak until I'm ready for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
With a snapshot.
Exactly. Of course, your blood boil does keep like refreshing the snapshot, but especially like if you don't want a dancing broom up and right away, then you want to have Outbreak available for when you press that dancing room button to get the double application. Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny because the best DK race is actually Alliance.
Oh.
Yeah.
Are we looking at Worgen? We looking at human? What are we looking at?
Looking at Worgen. Just 600 raw stat crit and a speed increase.
Pretty
Damn,
nice.
That's good. That's good. But other than that, let's talk about the real faction right now. Let's talk about Horde again. It's gonna be pretty much down between Orc and Troll, just like in Kata, where Orc will be our general preferred pick, and Troll will be insane on beast bosses. And there are a fair bit of beast bosses in this expansion. I think it's like 8 or something like that. So on those bosses, you'll be happy to be a Troll.
Professions. Yeah, so we talked about it earlier, just like we talked about the stat priority. You basically be going for your, I'd say, you'd go engineering and blacksmithing. I've heard people who want to go tailoring, but if for somebody who's not trying to worry about anything but the basic gameplay, me personally, I would go for engineering with blacksmithing.
What's
Why
the
tailoring?
Yeah, what's the tailoring angle?
Well, I'm not gonna disclose that some people had some testing that they did,
Oh, okay. Secret tech.
but it might not be
Okay.
anything worth considering for BDK.
Oh,
I do think that the
Riyani's
extra
intrigued.
gems are really good, so you can choose your path, whether it's crit or parry or whatever you're into, over main stat or primary stat. And then engineering, I don't think you can ever replace now the glider boosts. Boosts, like I said, sometimes the AMS, man, you backfire
Oh
and you just
god, I
full
didn't even
RP
think about
for
that.
free.
That's
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah.
like if you're at the end of the fight and you're not going to use boots, you can just send them off and hope that they fail, so you can get
That's
AMS running
wild.
power.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, in general, I see engineering blacksmithing as the go-to for every tank.
I feel like I'm so excited to talk about things that I find out that I never have the opportunity to keep on a competitive advantage at any point. I find a cook and we just lay it out on the table right away. um we could talk a little bit about Cinder Glacier. Um since that's a thing that people haven't really been considering before.
Yeah, that'd be a good one.
And just yeah, so just real quick, it is a proc that gives you 2 charges of a 20% damage amp to any frost or shadow spells. And that would include Soul Reaper, Death Siphon, Blood Boil, and Death Coil, and Death and Decay. Using Soul Reaper, Blood Boil, or Death Siphon consumes a stack. You get the damage increase, but it consumes a stack. But if you have Cinder Glacier up and you press Death and Decay, and Outbreak, they get the damage amp, they get the snapshot, or actually, the Outbreak gets the snapshot. It doesn't consume a charge. If you use Death and Decay, you get the damage amp while the buff is active. Doesn't consume a stack, but the damage amp fades if you use up your 2 stacks.
Wow, that's crazy value.
Yeah, and using Blood Boil will, on multiple targets, will consume 2 stacks, assuming that it's hitting more than 1 target. However, you will get the damage amp for every single target that it hits, and the snapshot of diseases will also be applied to every single target that it hits. So that is kind of nutty when you get High Vengeance, and it does have a pretty good proc chance as well. I was looking at a log of Will of the Emperor, and out of the last 10 Soul Reapers I did, I had the buff for 8 of them. So
wow,
yeah,
very nice.
If you're running Roiling Blood and you Dancing Rune Weapon and Outbreak for double application, and you use Blood Boil, the targets around you will not get the double application spreading of pestilence. But they do get them if you use a good old-fashioned pestilence. So it's certainly a good idea when fighting, for example, Stone Guards. When you use your double application of Outbreak to press Pestilence instead of pressing that 1 blood rune of Blood Boil. During Dancing Rune Weapon, if you press Soul Reaper, and you get the double application of Soul Reaper, if the Dancing Rune Weapon fades out, you don't actually get the damage from the second one.
Good to know.
Yeah. So in order to get 2 Soul Reapers out of your Dancing Rune Weapon window, you have to have Soul Reaper be your very first global, and you need to use it off cooldown, not even waiting for like a single global.